Today I'm sharing how I turned a cheap $19.98 plastic planter into a gorgeous faux vintage terracotta planter. Google Lens mistakenly identified it as a $2,700 Spanish 19th century urn planter, so here's how a little bit of paint transformed it. So I went shopping for an extremely large planter to house this ZZ plant that my sister found for me. This inexpensive plastic planter from Walmart was a perfect size, but it was nothing to look at. I brought it home and using some White Lightning cleaner, I gave it a really good wipe down inside and out. This cleaner works really well at cleaning off any oils, dirt, anything that might inhibit the primer from adhering properly. After I clean it all up with the White Lightning, I use a damp sponge with clean water to wipe down any residue the cleaner may have left. To get paint or a paint faux finish to stick onto a plastic container or plastic anything for that matter, I always use a bonding primer. With a bonding primer, I can skip the sanding altogether. I brought out my synthetic brush, which these are very inexpensive. Like you can get them for $1 or $2. That way you don't have to worry about cleaning because you don't want this bonding primer going down your drains because it's very, very sticky adhesive. So I like using these throwaway synthetic brushes. And I'm using Bonding Boss here, which is a water-based bonding primer. I always keep this in my inventory because it sticks to any slick surface. So it could be glass, it could be plastic, it could be metal. This bonding primer will stick to everything. It's water-based, it's easy to use. However, I did run into an issue using it on this plastic. So in a bit, I'm going to share the best practice tip for using this on a plastic surface. Also, I wanted to mention for the faux terracotta finish that I was aiming to achieve here, I did not want this primer to be applied super smooth. The more texture I added to this planter, the better for the overall finish I was looking for. I also varied my brush strokes, so not just that it didn't have to be super smooth, I actually intentionally went one way up and down, then I would brush it on from side to side, I would brush on diagonal, I even pounced it in a few areas to create some added texture. I also did the inside about partway down, maybe a third of the way down, because I knew I was going to paint the inside rim to match the outside as well. Now, the next morning I came down and did a scratch test using a very sharp top head of the screwdriver. Where the Bonding Boss was applied thicker on the plastic, it worked just fine. Where it was applied thinner, a thinner layer on the plastic, it was not bonding 100%. I've never had this issue using this bonding primer on furniture, so on wood. However, with the plastic, well, I learned something. It's really better to apply a thicker coat rather than a thinner coat when I'm painting over plastic. To fancy this planter up, I busted out some Wood You Bend trim, and I love this stuff. I really love using it. I love the smell when it heats up. I love the way it softens up and bends. I like applying it and how it looks after it's all finished. I love this product, and they have so many fabulous designs to choose from. I will leave a link in the description box below to all the supplies I'm using if you care to check it out. To apply the Wood You Bend, I use a heat gun to heat it up, and that's what softens it up and makes it very flexible. I also found it was much easier to cut manageable sections of this trim to wrap around this planter rather than keeping the trim on the coil and use the full length. It just made this so much more easier to do. To apply it, I would heat it up. I would cut off a section. So as I mentioned, it's very much easier to work with this way. Once it's heated and pliable, I add wood glue to the back. I made sure that the full back was covered with glue. And then using the existing lip or the existing detail on this plastic planter, I glued it on. To get it to adhere properly, my clamps wouldn't quite reach it, so I did find it helpful to put one hand in behind the planter, like in behind the wood you bend, on the inside of the planter, and the other hand on the outside, and push on both edges so it would adhere properly. And once I had it in place, I also used my heat gun to adhere it even more. The heat, the warmth really helps it out. I worked my way around the planter using the same steps until I had the entire planter wrapped. And one last tip I'll leave you with, I was cutting it straight up and down and connecting the pieces, which it connects beautifully. Like seriously, once it's primed and painted, you'd never even know. But I did find that if I cut it on the diagonal, it totally disappears. So for future, whenever I'm applying this trim, I will be cutting it on the diagonal to join the pieces rather than vertically. I left the wood you bend to dry probably like half a day, which is not necessary. A couple of hours would do it, but I just went and did some things upstairs. And then I came back down and gave this entire planter, including the trim, a second coat of Bonding Boss. I let that dry for a couple of hours as well. While applying the second coat of primer, again, I was not trying to get a smooth finish. I really wanted some texture, so I applied it up and down, I applied it side to side, and even dabbed in a few places. Now for the fun part. To get this faux clay terracotta look is all about layering paint colors. So I chose drop cloth, chocolate, and terracotta to get this warm vintage look. Using a large soft brush, I started applying the drop cloth as a base coat to the planter. It's a beautiful color. While still wet, and seriously, right after I applied some of that drop cloth, I dipped the brush into a little bit of the chocolate I had on the plate and just started applying that very randomly. As you can see, I brush it on up and down. I do from side to side. Then I went in and grabbed a little bit of the terracotta and I started doing the same thing. There's no right or wrong way to do this. It is seriously just playing with paint, mixing the three colors together, adding a little extra terracotta or chocolate where you want it. If you wanted it a little lighter, go grab a little more of the drop cloth and just kind of mush it all together and put it on there. It is quite fun. And the very best part about this process is if you don't like what you see, you paint over it. You can just do a redo, because the more layers and texture you have on this planter, the more authentic it starts to look. So if I found that my brush was drying out a little bit, I used the spray mister, the water mister, to just put a little bit on the tip so the paint would keep on moving. So you do want it to move and kind of blend into itself. So I found that the water mister was helpful. I even went ahead and just misted the actual planter, the paint on the planter, and did it that way. As I said, there's no right or wrong way to do this. It is seriously just playing with the paint until you get the look that you're happy with. And to make sure this planter looks very authentic, I also did the lip of the planter and painted the inside as well, because I didn't want to be looking down, walking past my planter in my living room, looking down and seeing the gray plastic on the inside. So I like doing the inside in the same faux finish as the outside. When I had the first coat nice and dry, I went in with a second coat and did the exact same thing. Just put the paint on the plate, added it to my brush in different colors, and started dabbing up and down, started brushing right to left, up and down, just to get a more and more textured look. And isn't this amazing? You know, I've been painting for so many years, and I'm always shocked at what a difference paint can do. Whether you're painting something in a solid color, it can look so drastically different, and or if you're using a blend of a few colors to create a faux finish, I don't know, I'm just amazed. I love paint. Once the second coat was dry and I was really happy with the look, I wanted to give it a more vintage feel, like an old world look. So I took out some collard greens and a smaller brush. I sprayed it with the water mister and just dabbing a little bit of green onto the rim and onto the trim really gave it a really vintage old look. To get an old world drippy vibe, I sprayed it a little bit with the water mister. I think I also ended up grabbing a shop towel or paper towel and dabbing at that. If it was a little too much, you could just dab a little bit off. That's no biggie either. But I really like this look. I did the same technique for the trim on the bottom as well. To seal and protect this piece and unify the terracotta faux finish, I used gator hide mixed with about 10% terracotta paint. And I ended up brushing on 2 coats. I wasn't overly particular about how I brushed it on because, again, the more texture, the better. I think it looks much better and more authentic when the top coat is brushed on in different directions and dabbed into some areas, exactly like the faux paint technique I used with the primer and I used with the paint. I let everything dry, and just as a reminder, here's the before. And here's the after. And I have to say, with my new ZZ plant in there, I am loving this faux vintage terracotta plastic planter. And as I mentioned, Google Lens mistakenly, when I took a picture of it, mistakenly identified it as a 19th century terracotta urn. Now, I think they kind of got the color a little off, but I see that the texture is pretty similar. I am so happy with the outcome of this cheapo planter. I think it looks so great housing this beautiful plant my sister got for me. I can't wait to hear what you think and if you would try this faux paint technique. Thanks so much for joining me for this plastic planter project today. If you gained any value, feel free to like and subscribe here on YouTube. I'll also leave a link down in the description box for all the materials and supplies I've used, along with a free email sign up so you can receive all the new projects right to your inbox. Until next project, have a fabulous week. Bye, guys.